All right, so ready for another deep dive.
Absolutely. Always up for a good mystery.
Well, today we're looking into one that really gripped India. It's the Arushi Talwar case.
Ah, yes. I remember when this case was all over the news.
Yeah, it was huge, and almost 2 decades later, it's still unsolved. Talk about a true crime story that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.
Definitely. It's got all the elements, twists and turns, media frenzy, and just a tragic loss that still resonates today.
And today, we're going to try to untangle it all, right? We're using this really detailed audio account as our guide. So basically, we're going to, try to sift through the facts and try to figure out what happened.
It's fascinating, because at first glance, it almost seems like, well, like an open and shut case.
Mm.
But then as you dig deeper, you realize just how complex and murky the whole thing gets.
Yeah, that's what makes it so intriguing. Like, how did something that seemed so straightforward become such a tangled web?
Right. And I think that cultural context plays a big role here, too. The way the investigation was handled, the public reaction, it was all influenced by the societal norms and values at play.
Absolutely. So let's set the stage. We're in Noida, India, May 16th, 2008.
A seemingly normal day turns into a nightmare when 13-year-old Arushi Talwar is found murdered in her family's apartment.
And to make things even more confusing, right from the start, the family's live-in servant, Hemraj Banjad, he's missing.
Gone without a trace. And of course, that immediately makes him the prime suspect.
Especially when you consider the initial crime scene, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Some things about Arushi's room, the way it was, well, it looked staged.
Yeah.
Her body was partially covered, and the murder weapon, nowhere to be found.
So it's like, okay, missing servant, staged room, seems like a classic whodunit, right?
Right out of a detective novel. But of course, real life is rarely that neat and tidy.
Yeah, it's never that simple. And from what I understand, there were some, shall we say, oversights in those early stages of the investigation.
Oh, absolutely. Like the crime scene wasn't secured properly. That could easily contaminated evidence. Plus, the focus on hemorrhage was so intense, it's possible other leads were overlooked.
And then, of course, you have the media frenzy that erupted almost immediately.
Oh, yeah. The media went crazy with this case. Leaked information, personal messages all over the news. Talk about a trial by media.
It's incredible how much influence they had, right? Shaping public opinion, even maybe influencing the direction of the investigation itself.
No doubt about it. The picture they painted of the family, especially the parents, it wasn't pretty. And that created a level of suspicion that was, well, almost impossible to escape.
And then just when you think the case couldn't get any wilder, boom, massive twist.
Hemorrhage's body is
On
found
the terrace.
of the Talwar's apartment building.
Talk about a game changer.
Right. Suddenly, the prime suspect is another victim. Everything they thought they knew, out the window.
It's amazing how quickly that narrative shifted. So no hemorrhage, where do they turn next?
Well, they start looking closer to home, towards the family itself. Okay. And this is where that theory of an honor killing comes into play.
The police basically suggested that Arushi's father, Rajesh Talwar, he found Arushi and Hemraj in a, well, how did they put it, a compromising position.
Yeah, that's the term they used, leading to a fit of rage and, well, the murders.
Honor killing, it's a complex concept, but in this context, they're basically saying Rajesh acted out of, a sense of betrayal, anger, protecting the family honor as they saw it.
Exactly. But here's the catch. A lot of the evidence they had to support this theory, circumstantial.
Okay, like what? What were they pointing to?
Deleted photos from Arushi's camera, a whiskey bottle with fingerprints. They even suggested Rajesh was having an affair with another dentist.
So trying to build a narrative, but without that solid physical evidence directly linking him to the murders.
Exactly. They even went as far as using narco-analysis tests on Rajesh, his wife Nupur, and a friend of Arushi's, hoping to dig up some hidden truth.
Narcoanalysis, that's pretty controversial, right?
Oh, very much so. And even with those tests, no concrete physical evidence emerged.
So we have Rajesh under suspicion, this cloud hanging over him, fueled by the honor killing theory, and, well, bits and pieces of evidence, but nothing conclusive. What happens next? Do they just keep going down this road?
With public pressure mounting and the case going nowhere, the Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI, they step in. Fresh set of eyes.
Ah, the big guns arrive. New team, new perspective. What do they do differently?
They start exploring a totally different angle. They look into the possibility of sexual assault. They really scrutinize the initial autopsy report, focus on the doctor's statements about Arushi's injuries, see if anything's off.
Okay.
And then they come up with a completely new theory, one that shifts the focus away from the family and onto a group of servants.
Whoa, hold on. So we go from honor killing within the family to now the servants having a motive. Talk about a 180. What was their reasoning?
They propose that 3 servants, driven by revenge against Rajesh, they committed the murders.
Revenge for what?
Well, they don't get into specifics. This theory really hinges on confessions they got from those narco-analysis tests, remember?
Oh, right. But those were, well, how reliable are those really?
Yeah, that's debatable, to say
Hmm.
the least.
So, new direction from the CBI, but again, it sounds like shaky ground. Conflicting confessions, unclear motives, and still no solid physical evidence. Like, we're going in circles here. First Hemorrhage, then Rajesh, now these servants. Did anyone have a solid theory in this case?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? And just when you thought it couldn't get more complicated, there's another twist.
Another one. Hit me.
They find Arushi's missing phone.
Wait, the phone. I thought that was gone for good.
Nope. Shows up a year after the murders.
And wasn't that a key piece of evidence in that whole servant theory?
Oh, yeah. It definitely casts doubt on their involvement. And just when you think the twists and turns are over,
Oh, come on, there's more.
enter a second CVI team.
Yeah,
And guess what?
new theory.
They decide to go back to the honor killing.
Are you serious?
But with a twist. This time, they focus on Arushi's mother, Nupur.
So now both parents are suspects. This is getting out of hand. What's their evidence against Nupur?
It's mostly circumstantial. Her behavior after the murders, some supposed inconsistencies in her statements. They say she helped cover up the crime.
Wow.
Of course, the defense denied everything. They argued Nupur was just a grieving mother caught in a horrific situation.
So two completely different interpretations of the evidence. The prosecution relying on circumstantial stuff, pointing at Nupur. The defense claiming innocence, saying it's all just grief. What happens? Does the court buy the prosecution's case?
In a shocking turn of events, the court delivers a guilty verdict.
No way.
Both Rashesh and Nupur Talwar are found guilty and sentenced to life in prison.
Guilty. With all that uncertainty, this case is nuts. What happens next? Did the Talwars just accept their fate?
Well, that's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive.
All right, well, I'm hooked. I need to know what happens next. But before we go, what stood out to you so far? What are you thinking about as we leave off here?
So, the Talwars, they appeal the verdict. And this takes them to the Allahabad High Court.
Okay.
And this is where things really take a turn.
How so?
Well, the High Court, they actually overturned the guilty verdict.
Whoa, seriously? After all that?
Yep. They basically said, look, the evidence, the way the investigation was handled, it just wasn't enough to prove their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
Wow, that must have been a huge relief for the Talwars. But what about the lower court? I mean, they came to a completely different conclusion, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The High Court, they were pretty critical of how the case was handled right from the start.
What do you mean?
Well, like the crime scene, they said it wasn't handled properly, potentially contaminated evidence, no proper chain of custody for key pieces of evidence.
Ah, so they're basically saying the whole foundation of the case was shaky.
Exactly. And they didn't stop there. They also said a lot of the evidence against the Talwars was, well, circumstantial. Didn't really add up to a clear picture of guilt.
So all that stuff about the deleted photos, the whiskey bottle, even the alleged affair,
The High Court said, look, that's not enough. You can't convict someone on that.
it really highlights how important that burden of proof is, right? The prosecution has to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and the High Court said they just didn't do that.
Right. And so the Talwars, they walk free after years in prison.
Must felt amazing to finally clear their names.
Absolutely.
Mm.
But it also opened up a whole can of worms, didn't it? Questions about the investigation, the media's role, what justice even means in a case like this.
Yeah, it's crazy how much the public perception was swayed by the media coverage. Even though they were acquitted, there are still people who believe they did it.
The media definitely played a big part in shaping the narrative. Sensationalized details, leaks, it all painted this.
It's a very specific picture of them.
Right. And just shows you how powerful the media can be, how important it is to really think critically about what you see and hear, especially in cases like this.
And the impact on everyone involved, it's just...
Devastating.
The Talwars, they went through years of imprisonment, their reputations were ruined, they had to rebuild their lives with this shadow hanging over them.
And then you have Hemraj's family. They're still searching for answers, still convinced the Talwars are guilty.
Two families, forever linked by this tragedy, each with their own version of what happened.
And neither of them really getting closure. It's heartbreaking.
Even with the High Court's decision, there's still this unease, legally it's over, But the question of who actually did it, it's still out there.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle with a missing piece, a story with no ending.
And that ambiguity, it's hard to live with, especially in a case like this, with so much emotion, so much at stake.
We all want closure, right?
Right.
We want answers. But sometimes those answers just aren't there.
I think it's important, before we get into the lingering questions, to take a step back and remember who we're talking about here.
Right.
Arushi, a young girl, her life cut short. Her parents, Rajesh and Nupur, they became the center of the storm, went through years of scrutiny, imprisonment, and then finally, acquittal.
And Hemraj, the family's servant, his death is what really added that extra layer of mystery to this whole thing,
And his family still believes the Talwars are responsible.
adding yet another dimension to this already incredibly complicated story.
We can't forget about those 3 other servants either, the ones the CBI tried to pin it on.
Right, with those questionable confessions.
Yeah, it all just added to the confusion.
And then, of course, there's Dr. Dorr, the pathologist.
The one who did Arushi's autopsy.
Yeah, his findings, his statements, they were all over the place. Just fueled more speculation about what really happened.
It seems like every piece of evidence, every new testimony, instead of making things clearer, it just made it murkier.
And of course, we can't forget the media. They were a constant presence throughout this whole thing.
Their coverage, often sensationalized, really shaped how the public saw this case. And who knows, maybe even influenced the investigation itself.
It really is a tangled web. So much information, so many different possible conclusions.
A case that just defies easy answers, makes you realize just how much we don't know, you know?
Absolutely.
We've gone through a lot today. The initial shock, the way the first responders messed up, the media frenzy, the theories changing all the time, relying on shaky evidence, a wrongful conviction, then an acquittal. And yet, those doubts still linger.
It's impossible to shake the feeling that we've barely scratched the surface.
There's so much we still don't know, so many unanswered questions. It's almost like...
Like we're missing something crucial.
Exactly. So as we move into our final thoughts on this case, I'm curious, what has stuck with you the most? What stayed on your mind? What do you find most compelling or maybe most confusing about this whole story? It's the human side of it all, you know? It really gets to me.
Yeah, it's easy to get lost in the legal stuff. The evidence, the procedures, the verdicts.
But at the end of the day, it's about real people, real lives that were shattered.
Absolutely. 2 families forever marked by this tragedy. And it continues to affect them even now.
The Talwars, even though they were acquitted, they still carry this weight.
The suspicion, the judgment.
Their lives were completely upended. They had to rebuild everything under this cloud of doubt.
And Hemraj's family, still searching for answers.
Yeah.
Still convinced the Talwars are responsible.
They haven't found any peace. Their pain is just... it's palpable.
It really makes you think about what justice truly means.
Because even when there's a legal resolution, there's still this lingering sense of...
Injustice.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when the people most affected by the crime, they still don't feel like the truth has come out.
It also shows the limitations of our legal system, doesn't it?
We put so much faith in these systems, these investigations, these courts. But they're not perfect.
They can be influenced by mistakes, by biases, by outside pressures.
This case, it's like a lesson in critical thinking.
It really is. It forces you to question everything, to be skeptical, to realize that sometimes, even with all the technology we have...
Some mysteries just stay mysteries.
Exactly. And especially now, with social media, instant news everywhere.
You really have to be careful about what you believe.
Evaluate your sources, consider different perspectives, and be okay with the fact that sometimes...
You just won't get a clear-cut answer.
Right.
This case, it sticks with you, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It makes you think, it makes you talk, it makes you question your assumptions.
It forces you to confront some pretty uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about the systems we rely on.
And that's the thing about the Arushi Talwar case, isn't it?
Oh.
It's more than just a true crime story. It's a reflection of us.
Our flaws, our search for justice, our need to understand.
And sometimes I think the journey to find the truth is just as important as the truth itself.
Well said. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Arushi Talwar case. It's a case that continues to fascinate, frustrate, and ultimately remind us of the complexities of truth and justice. We hope you found this exploration as thought-provoking as we did. And until next time, keep those critical thinking caps on.